Welcome to Coffee with Democrats, a sensible platform for progressive conversations. Coffee with Democrats is a grassroots movement dedicated to hearing from Democrats, candidates, legislators, and friends from all political backgrounds who want great conversations. Coffee with Democrats is committed to increasing Democrat voter registration and Democrat voter turnout by making voting more exciting and meaningful. And with us today is a special guest host of Coffee with Democrats, former chief of the OSAGE Nation, Chief Jim Gray.
Good morning. We are here today on Coffee with Democrats. And a special guest today, guest host for Coffee with Democrats is the former chief of the Osage Nation, Jim Gray. We also have Walter Lamar. Walter Lamar is a former FBI agent. He's been recognized highly within the FBI and within the law enforcement community with his work with both what took place down in Waco during the Branch Davidian siege, as well as the Oklahoma bombing. He's been highly decorated within the FBI and commended for that. We also are expecting guests with Michael Anderson. He is an attorney who specializes in Indian Nation law. He is going to be a great participant today. He did graduate from Columbia University, and he's highly respected within the Native American and First Americans legal side, and particularly the part about making sure that indigenous policy and procedures is proper when as far as it goes to Hollywood, and making sure that Hollywood recognizes the processes there. Then we also have Holly Cook Macarro. She is a very highly respected person within both politics as well as within the Native American Nation. She is an advocate that is very helpful. So we're looking forward to having her come on this morning. She is also she's been an activist with the Democratic Party. So I hold that in high esteem as somebody that is very involved with politics. So we're looking forward to having her come on here as well. I will be muting myself, turning it over to Chief Gray now. And in the meantime, I'm going to be reaching out to Michael Anderson and to Holly to see if there are some issues with their Zoom to make sure that they can join us. So I'm going to back out. I'm going to mute myself altogether, and I'm just going to turn it over to Chief Jim Gray as our special host. And thank you so much for being our special host today.
Thank you, Kevin. Just so you know, I just texted Mike, and he's using the link you sent us this morning, and he's not getting in. So I told him to use the one that you sent us last week. So hopefully he'll be able to get on soon enough to participate. And Walt, it's just me and you, maybe for the whole hour. Who knows?
Hey, well, maybe that's all the better.
Yeah, right. We can talk about all the people that didn't make it to the panel. So I thought that would be good. No, actually, one of the things that really intrigued me about the movie Killers of the Flower Moon, obviously it's close personally to me, and it's my family that's in this story, and it's also my tribe that's in this story. And but I think it has a broader reach than that to all of Indian country, especially as it pertains to law enforcement issues, which features prominently in this film and the book as well. And as somebody who's worked in Federal Bureau of Investigation, which is part of this story as well, the beginnings of it, as well as the actual work that you've devoted your career to in law enforcement as a federal official, both at the FBI level as well as the Department of Interior and even the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and as a one-time director. I think that's how we met years ago. And so I thought maybe just as a general rule, can you talk about how important it is for Hollywood, who's engaged in multiple movie projects, both on the screen and in television and in streaming, where law enforcement issues have come up? I can think of Dark Winds. I can think of Yellowstone, Longmire, Wind River. There's numerous movies that have come out where law enforcement features prominently in the story. How important is it that we get this right? And just feel free to expand on whatever aspect that you feel is important.
And I'll say I just got a text from Holly. So Kevin, she is in the waiting room, so she's been waiting. But Chief Gray, number one, thank you for inviting me to participate this morning. And Kevin, I want to thank you for presenting this platform and forum for us to talk about some of these issues, because they are, I think they're not only issues that are important to us in the Native community, but across our communities in this country. You know, and it's as I was thinking about coming on today, I mean, for a long time, a very long time, Native American portrayals in television and in the movie industry, and I'll say, Chief Gray, I can include you in this, as baby boomers, we
just on the cusp, yeah.
Yeah, we recall as children that contradictory emotion of seeing us on screen, whether it was our little black and white television tubes, or whether it was at the big screen at the movie theater. We were kind of proud that we were thought of, but we were horrified in the way we were thought of. Right? We were kind of proud to see ourselves, but we were at the same time horrified. And so now we fast forward to the past several years, and maybe a little bit beyond that even. We've seen this amazing surge, Native content on television and now streaming networks. And what I would say is, and thinking about this, is that our stories are safer when we're involved. When we're involved in the process, whether we be financiers, whether we be directors, producers, writers, actors, and then cultural and content consultants. So we'll touch on that law enforcement question in a second too. But with this amazing surge and the importance of us being, and I don't say us, I say the industry being right about what the content is. I mean, you know, if a story revolves around heart implant surgery, they're going to have a consultant that's going to run them through and make sure that they're a consultant to talk about heart implants. But when you want to get it right. So if you're producing a movie that has or a TV series that includes Native content, absolutely, it's a bit more complicated than the one consultant scenario. And you think about our cultural diversity, our geographic, demographic diversity, the complexities of sovereignty, the government to government relationships, that roller coaster of federal policy. Then when you're asking about the criminal justice systems, I mean, it's laced with jurisdictional nuance. And when we are not part of that entire process, you know, and days gone by that when we were portrayed, it's just as I said, it was in a horrifying ways oftentimes, and it gradually progressed at a point where when we're portrayed, they're missing it still by a mile, right? And now as we're moving into present day, they're missing it more like by feet, but they're still missing it. And they're still missing it because oftentimes their thought is, well, if we've got a Native consultant, then that person can cover the gamut of everything that we're going to be presenting, whether it be cultural, whether it be law enforcement, whether it have to do with our communities and our languages. They expect that now they've got that one Native person there, they can check the box. It's absolutely not true. And when I've watched these television shows, and there are things that I'm gonna see that, you know, a lot of folks don't, because it's the law enforcement part. But we want authenticity and accuracy. We want this to be right, because this is our opportunity to make damn sure that our story is told correctly. To do that, the industry has to recognize that you don't get on the phone and call up one native and have them show up, and now you've checked the box and you've covered it.
Yeah.
It's much more than that. And when you brought up earlier about Killers of the Flower Moon, well, was it 2020 or 2021 when the announcement first came out that the movie was going to be made?
Right.
And somebody called me and asked me, well, what's my thought about it? Because of it's about the birth of the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, immediately I said, well, the FBI genesis should only be an interesting factoid as part of this.
Right.
I mean, you're going to tell the story of the Oklahoma City bombing. You're going to tell the story of the tragedy.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to have as the side story, the investigation and talking about the investigation. Likewise here, my hope was that the FBI, the birth of the FBI would be an interesting factoid, but that the story would revolve around the Osage people, the tragedy, and to tell that story. And Mike Anderson, I see he's here now, but he and I have talked about it, and the fact that Osage leadership, including yourself, had an opportunity on the front end to meet with Martin Scorsese, that it changed the trajectory and it changed the story. Now, I haven't seen the movie, but talking to you and others that have, that basically is now what happened, that the FBI genesis is an interesting factoid, but the movie concentrates on the tragedy and the true story. And so I'll just add one more thing to this, though, but I feel like the movie is concentrated there, but the commentary surrounding the movie, and that it's our responsibility to address, is the fact that this there with the Osage people was as tragic and as horrific as it could be, but the same story is across our communities across
Absolutely.
Indian
That's
country,
right.
whether it be precious metals, whether it be timber, water, uranium, coal, natural gas, even grazing leases and farm
agriculture. Yeah, absolutely.
And in every case, the anything that we own or control, there's always been the risk of hucksters, opportunists, criminals, thieves, and the commentary that we have to promote is that it goes on yet today.
Mm-hmm.
The Killers of the Flower Moon is going to be an incredible platform for us to tell that part of the story as well. So,
well, look no further than the missing and murdered Indigenous women issue that is in today's newspapers today. So I would say that you're absolutely correct. These issues are still happening. Thank you, Mike. I wanted to ask Holly, one of the things that we did in our introduction was to talk about some of your work that you've done, both politically as well as your work in Indian country, in terms of getting the movie industry more prepared for taking on Indigenous content, because that seems to be the topic of interest at this point. We're seeing a surge in of content coming out in all platforms, movies, television, streaming services, and there's a real ripe opportunity for Indian country to engage in a equal basis, in a way that maybe we haven't been in the past. And your work as chair of the Illuminative organization certainly has brought a lot of that to light in the last 5 years. And I thought maybe this might be a good time for you to pitch the work that you do there a little bit, and hopefully expand on where you see things moving in the post Killers of the Flower Moon era that we think is going to happen. That's going to, I think, explode even more interest in Indigenous content.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for having me this morning. And I think you've hit on what we're really seeing right now is a renaissance in Indian country, not just in the film industry, but in politics, right? All of us, I see, Walt Lamar, Michael Anderson, we've all worked in the political space for so long, and coming at it from different perspectives and roles. Michael and I were in the Clinton administration together, and I look back then and on how different things were. We used to get so excited when the president would include Native Americans when he, listed off communities of color, and we expect so much more now, and rightfully so. This renaissance, I think, in terms of politics and visibility and all of that, I think, we are seeing in much more accurate portrayals in the film industry. And my work at Illuminative is as chair of the board, right? Crystal Echohawk is the founder and the real visionary behind the work at Illuminative, and along with a really tremendous team there. And that work and the identifying, I always say that Crystal saw a space that needed to be filled, right? And Illuminative provides, I think, both social media content, which is so important in driving a message, in pushing a narrative or calling something out. And she does it in a very nimble way. The team at Illuminative is very responsive, from things like Rick Santorum's inappropriate comments to things like, helping get over the finish line the changing of the name of the Washington professional football team. All of those things, they were team efforts, but the amplification of how to accurately portray Indian country, Native Americans, our stories, how to tell our stories in a way that is not the commercialization or just perpetuating what we've always known is as the Hollywood Indian or the Hollywood version of Indians. And that work over the last, I think we just crossed the 5-year mark at Illuminative. I think all of that in conjunction with so many people who've done this work for so long, right? We all stand on their shoulders. We are approaching a time, and as we see Killers of the Flower Moon, I'm actually in New York City today, and I saw this huge billboard, and it's Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, and Lily Gladstone. And it brought tears to my eyes to think, it's so incredible to see.
It's moving, isn't it? Yeah.
It really, it's surprisingly emotional when you see that. It's such a big deal to us, and it marks a place, I think, in time and history. And I think we're on the brink of seeing, hopefully, another momentous time in history as we move towards award season. But all of that, it's this renaissance in Indian country. I think the electoral politics, the rise of the influence and power of Indian country, and the voice of Indian country politics and media, and in film, where it's a remarkable time.
Well, thank you. I wanted to say a few words about Yancey's inability to come on to this podcast. He called me last night, and he was terribly sorry that he wasn't going to be able to participate. And I know some of you who have followed his sudden rise to stardom with his participation in this film was even echoed even in the most recent final episode of Reservation Dogs, which I hope we have time to talk a little bit about as well. But here's where I think if Yancey was here, I wouldn't put him on the spot to ask him about his experience in the film, and certainly because of the ongoing strike with the actors, he has to, protect the solidarity of the group by not participating in any media, and I respect that and everything. I was happy to say, well, let's just talk about your record collection. I don't care. Just get on with the call, But as it turned out, he had a project that he did want to talk about. And if it's all right with you, I'd like to say a few words about it. His dad, the late Charles Redcorn, was a historian, and throughout his entire life was a writer. He was he had an Ivy League education, and he came back home and worked and devoted his life to Indian country. And throughout his life, he sat down and talked to people, OSAGEs, who had experienced the kind of tragedy that is documented in Killers of the Flower Moon. But in their cases, their stories were never investigated. What was happened to them speaks to the multiple number of unsolved cases that were uninvestigated during that period of time. And for the sake of those memories, he wrote a fictional novel in a way that told their stories without disclosing their names. But as I remember talking to him about it years ago when he wrote the book back in 2002, he said, I said, why did you write it fiction? You know, everybody's doing a nonfiction version of this, you know, and he says, I wanted to write it fiction so that I could tell the truth, if you get my meaning. The stories were completely taken from oral testimonies that he took down over the course of 30, 40 years of visiting with elders who had survived that period of time. And he captured it in a book called A Pipe for February. And it was so moving to be able to know that Yancey had auditioned and got the part to play Chief Bonnicastle in the movie and played the chief of the tribe. And during his engagement with the filmmakers, specifically Scorsese, they struck up a conversation about A Pipe for February. Scorsese wanted to see it, and he showed him the book, and he read it. And it wasn't too much longer after that, during the production, that he decided to add a scene to the film. And I'm going to break my tradition and just give you just a small spoiler. The opening scene in the book of A Pipe for February is the opening scene in Killers of the Flower Moon. And he acquired the rights to use that scene for the purpose of the film because the beginning of that scene was so moving. And even though it to the visitor just watching it in the film, watching it in the theater, who may not be Native American or Osage, they're going to see an opening scene that takes place 20, 25 years before the events of Killers of the Flower Moon. And my impression from that experience is to watch how the Osage elders at that particular period of time anticipated what changes were going to come. And they were trying to prepare their people, that next generation, that some of these old ways were going to have to evolve into embracing a new world. And we were going to have to walk in two worlds, and we were going to have to accept certain things. And that's the dynamic of A Pipe for February, is that push and pull of what do you hang on to? What do you adapt? What do you resist? What do you embrace? Who do you love? Who do you trust? All these things are wrapped up in this book. And I'm so excited about the fact that that part of that book is in this movie. And it just means a lot to me as an Osage and as somebody who grew to know and love and respect a dear elder who unfortunately won't be able to see this. And I know that if Yancey was here, he would be expressing these kind of sentiments as well, that this is such an important piece of book. And just recently, they did a second printing at the University of Oklahoma Press, where Martin Scorsese wrote the foreword to the reprint of the book, and David Grand wrote a back flap blurb promoting the book as well and encouraging people to read it. So that's my shameless plug for A Pipe for February. And now I want to go to Mike and say, you know, after what we heard from Walt and what we've heard from Holly, there's a practical aspect that I think people have raised this question before, and you've actually dug into this area. Aside from your legendary career in Indian law world, you've branched out into doing some entertainment law and allowing tribes who may have an interest in this to help bankroll and finance. And what are the challenges that you see for tribes that are engaged in, maybe in order to really command that story, sometimes it's better to have an interest in that project. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, great question. You know, I've always interested in film, both the Renaissance in the 70s when you had Little Big Man and Outlaw Josie Wells and Soldier Blue, some of my favorite Native American films. But in 2016, I was part of featured in a documentary called Promised Land, which was about the struggle of the Duwamish tribe in Seattle to obtain federal recognition. And in talking to the producers and directors, I thought, wow, you know, this is great that an independent film company can do a topic in film on a very specialized topic, like the Duwamish recognition. And since then, I've just seen a number of documentaries that are very specialized. They're in a niche market. But I've also seen in the broader context with Killers of the Flower Moon, much more commercially, marketable, larger films and then films and TV shows like Dark Winds and Reservation Dogs. I mean, there has been a renaissance. And so as my clients look to expand, diversify from primarily gaming establishments and that kind of field and those endeavors, we started looking at Native American film. It doesn't have the margins, obviously, as a large casino would have, but there is profit to be made both in the smaller market and larger. And so that's how I became involved in it. The BIA used to guarantee films through their guaranteed loan program. They're not really doing it as much now, but they sponsored and bankrolled Wind River and LBJ and some other films. And so that's how my clients got involved in thinking that maybe they could diversify their economies, get into film, but also because they really want to shape and form the content. They want Native American role models, and I'll just make my own shameless plug. Both Walt and Holly and I are on the Native American Hall of Fame board.
Yeah.
We have an induction ceremony in a couple of weeks in Oklahoma City at the First American Museum. And one of our inductees is Will Sampson, who is a Muskogee Creek like I am. In the very early films, like when you didn't see a lot of Indian faces, but in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and he was also in The Outlaw Josie Wells and in Poltergeist and some other films. But so I had an historical kind of interest just from having a tribal member in film, and now seeing that our clients want to actually do investment in films and expand into entertainment.
If just so we tie up this loose end here, Mike, if somebody wanted to participate, invest, sponsor, anything like that, where can they go and what can they do?
Well, the film producers are always looking for investments. And so if you read the trades, Variety and others, you'll see a film is in production. I actually met with the production company for Killers of the Flower Moon at an early point, and before they'd actually really engaged with the Osage tribe. And I was talking to them both about investment, also, but things like using traditional tribal regalia in the film, actual Osage language, and things that I later learned that they parroted back to the tribe when they met with them. So that was terrific.
They heard you.
Yeah, but and many other people, I know the tribe eventually had a consultant directly working with as a liaison to the film production company. But it's basically following the trades and see what's in production. Films always need money, even the large films, whether it's a monster like Killers of the Flower Moon or very small productions. And so it's one of the challenges for the filmmaker is to really, sometimes they're great on the artistic side, but they're not great on the business side. So you need a marketing plan, you need a sales agent, you need a foreign distribution if that's the kind of film that's marketable there. But it's basically doing business in a just artistic content, which is a challenge for many people.
I think one of the things that make Killers of the Flower Moon so interesting, and I don't know if you all recall, but the day the movie premiered at Cannes Film Festival in France back in May, I had already seen the movie, and I was as one of the descendants of the people who are killed in this film. The Apple thought it would be a good idea to invite the descendants of those that are featured in the film to be able to see it privately before it is shown worldwide. And so I had a chance to go to New York and watch it, a private screening. And so, but before I left, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement. So you guys know what that's like, I got to see it, but I couldn't tell nobody about it. And I have to say, it was probably the longest 2.5 weeks of my life, sitting here at my home and not even able to talk to friends or family about what I got to see. And but it was moving, and it was incredibly moving, and it was powerful in its message. And so these ideas have been rattling around in my head the whole time. And so the day the film premiered, I got an email from the lawyers with Apple and saying I've been lifted from my non-disclosure agreement, and I can talk about it at any time after 2:30 this afternoon Central Time. So I had to wait, and so when 2:30 hit, I started typing away, and I made a series of tweets. And I thought about writing a review like your conventional critic review, that everyone else would do, And I thought, no, there's tons of people who can write that, What can I write that maybe no one else would? And based on what I experienced watching the evolution from the book coming out to the movie rights being bought, to the outreach efforts, and to the response by the tribe as an evolutionary process of collaboration that eventually led to an active participation of between the tribe and Scorsese and the film company in making this film. And then after all that, getting in a chance to see it was so powerful. It doesn't answer every question people are going to have. Is it the story the Osages would have written? Probably not. But for the purposes of this film being made in such a collaborative manner, it blew my mind looking at the amount of artistic creativity and genuine desire to get this story right by everybody who worked on the sets, to the people who worked in costume, to Robert De Niro's commitment to be able to speak Osage and do it in a convincing way was my biggest takeaways from that film. And so I wrote about all that in those tweets and saved very little to just talk about. I thought it was a great movie, and I've never seen it like that because it didn't elevate the white savior narrative as the FBI coming in on the white horse saving the day. They solved one or two cases out of literally hundreds of unsolved mysterious deaths that maybe weren't so mysterious after all, but certainly unsolved, uninvestigated. And so the viewer is left understanding that the resilience of the Osage people was really the thing that got us through that period of time. And specifically Molly, the character Molly, played by Lily Gladstone, so bravely and passionately controlling her energy and emotions, staying in the realm of that character, but knowing that she's Osage and she's surrounded by all these forces, some sharing her own bed. And it is just an incredible movie. I couldn't say enough things about how they interpreted that story and put it on the screen the way they did. That tweet, last time I checked, it was like 7.4 million views around the world. And I didn't think people would care that much about process, but I want to throw the question to all of you. How important is process when it comes to getting that part right and not knowing until you see the final product whether or not that process produced a result that you could be proud of? Walt, you go first.
Well, Chief, number one, I think you must have talked to Scorsese about lighting tricks because you're doing a really good job with that lighting. maybe you can get.
I'm a big fan of cloudy skies because it's good for camera work.
Okay, so Scorsese gave you a one up on the rest of us with your lighting. And then I'd also like to just mention quickly, Mike brought up Will Sampson, and Will Sampson was very much a proponent of hiring Native actors to play Native roles. And I think that's part of our excitement about inducting him into the National Native American Hall of Fame is that, he wasn't the only one, but he was on the front end of that movement to ensure that to make it more correct. I'd also like to just say too to the listeners, when I mentioned earlier about the complexities and the nuances, it's incredibly important to recognize there's 574 federally recognized tribes. There are state recognized tribes. There are 200 different languages spoken, and oftentimes people talk about the native culture. There is really no such thing as the native culture because we're made up of a lot of cultures, and I mentioned the diversity that we're all across the country, and hopefully the biggest takeaway from today's visit is that folks it'll pique their curiosity. They'll do a little more exploration and figure out who we are. That they'll grab a book and they'll pick it up and read a little bit more about who we are, and Oscar Hokey just came out with a book called Calling for a Blanket Dance.
Mhm.
And for those folks in Oklahoma, it is tremendously insightful because it takes you right to the Kiowa people, right to the Cherokee people, right to the essence and the heart of being multi-tribal, growing up multi-tribal, growing up in Oklahoma. And it's a wonderful way to gather that kind of insight. But please do take that time to think about who we truly are and what when we're talking about the movies and the industry, what we're talking about is that it's not just a singular story.
Thank you. Holly?
I'm so glad that you brought the question about process up, because we've seen the work. Bird Running Water was at Sundance for 20 years. He recently left. Adam Perone is doing a terrific job there now. And the programs that they put together in terms of the labs and the fellowships to get natives on the other side of the camera as well, right? Which is so important. We have Jane Myers was just nominated for
Yes.
Emmys, who was on that side of the camera as the producer of Prey, and continues to have a number of projects out there. That process and having those voices and those eyes from the ground up are so important in making sure that this Renaissance time that I've referred to only gets better. And so that process is getting people and teams, and not just as consultants, but as writers, which we see, Sierra Teller Ornelas, who was the first woman Native American showrunner on Rutherford Falls. We see, as you referenced, what just ended was a terrific 3 seasons for all of Indian country, and a lot of people in America, and watching Reservation Dogs, that all of that, both sides of the camera are so important.
Absolutely. That is a perfect example if you want to look at the situation, like, how do we get it right? I mean, what is the optimum standard that we should be shooting for as an industry? I would say, in the movies, if you're going to have, because not every movie is going to have a Martin Scorsese directed, and it's not going to have these A-list actors like DiCaprio and De Niro and Gladstone come in and carry the weight of the film based on their star status. You may have smaller projects that may involve other tribes, but if nothing, you can learn that there's a process here of getting that part right. Even if you're not a Scorsese, you can follow Scorsese's process and producing a film that actually is respectful of the tribe you're telling the story about, or the indigenous people you're telling the story about. Mike, I got to throw you a Reservation Dogs question, brother, because this one hits real close to home, and I just wondered if you could speak to how you feel like the Muskogee Creek people have embraced this story, how they've engaged in it in terms of feeling a sense of pride. That scene in the jail where Lily Gladstone plays Hodke, and she's talking to Willie Jack about drawing upon the strength of her ancestors to get her through the troubling times that she was going through. It was such a powerful, moving moment in the entire series. It's left an indelible mark on my psyche, because it spoke to me. I literally wept watching that scene. Can you talk a little bit about it, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, the community has completely embraced that film. I think half my relatives have been in it. There were one of my aunts was in one of the singing scenes. But yeah, I think they captured the community life from death, healing, kinship, and all the themes that they really kind of rememorialized in the last episode. And the community has completely embraced it. The scenes. What I was concerned about is, would this resonate, globally or nationally with other reservations? And it has, because I think the stories are so familiar. I wasn't sure the Indian humor would translate, but it translated very well.
Yeah.
Is that they had a Native American writers' room. Some of the guys from the 1491s, like Ryan Redcorn and Dallas Goldtooth, are in there. And I think that makes a difference. The authenticity, when you try to I think about the dark old days 30 years ago when Pocahontas came out, and you clearly did not have a native imprint on that. The difference between the Res Dogs, and I think after Killers of the Flower Moon, I think there's going to be a continued evolution marketplace for native films. Holly mentioned the Sundance Institute. I know she's involved with them, and that's a great place when you talk about process. It's great to have written content and actors, but in the end, it comes down to financing and producing films. And the fact that there are now more executive producers, associate producers, and others for film, showrunners, that is going to make a huge difference. You'll see that both in very small films and large films, in the next year or two as these films come into production.
I think one of the things I really admired about the way Sterling Harjo handled this entire 3-year run was that, you see it in other communities, you see it in our own community sometimes, where somebody achieves a certain level of fame, they pull the ladder up, and he didn't do that. He did not do that. He took the opportunity that he had, and he brought other people with him. He gave them opportunities to shine, and he asked certain people that he had worked with in the past to come in and step in and direct an episode or to help write an episode, like you said, Mike. And so that there were multiple fingers all over this project that had different visions, different creative juices that were going into it, that made the story so fresh. Each one was so uniquely different from the other, even though there was a narrative to the whole story, especially this last season, because they were tying things up. But I just want to give a shout out to Sterling, because that was a choice he made. And it was such a smart choice, because like you said, Mike, we don't want this to be a one-off. We want this to be the beginning of a new renaissance of Indigenous filmmaking, both in front of the camera, behind the camera, and the content. Because what we discovered through both telling an accurate portrayal, reflecting a historical event that happened in our past, like Killers of the Flower Moon, or telling a contemporary story about the lives of Indigenous people living today, with all the challenges and struggles that contemporary society has placed upon them, and the unrealistic expectations that mainstream media has put on us. Yet we still find a way to have our own voice and have our own space to be able to tell this story from our point of view. I think it's just gonna, it gives me reason to hope that these are not the exceptions as they have been perceived today, but they're gonna be the rule going forward, I think. Holly, if you don't mind, I want to dig a little deeper in terms of a little bit about how important it is that we organize a pipeline of content for the industry, because you don't want them to just pick a consultant. You don't want them to just, do it as if it's a PR move. You want the original work to get the best attention from the industry that has the resources to make it real. And but the burden is on us too, right? We have to produce, we have to write scripts, we have to go into acting classes. We have, there's a TikTok video of a woman that's just going off on how come there's not an Osage playing the lead actress. Well, if we had an Osage that had, worked her way up like through the ranks like Lily did, maybe that argument would make sense. But Lily demonstrated the ability to channel her own Indigenous upbringing into this character. But it just speaks to the need for us to be able to do our part. Can you talk a little bit about the work that Illuminative does to help create that?
Yes. Creating that pipeline, I think, puts and you said, we have that same responsibility to show up in spaces where we want to be represented and with those same kind of talents. And I think of it a little bit in terms of politics, right? Back in the day, I think Michael, you remember there just weren't a lot of, for instance, Native Americans doing either, advocacy work. The entire lobbying industry was made up of non-natives that were representing tribes, but we hadn't had enough people in the pipeline, right, to serve in administrations, to get that sort of Hill experience and do all of that. And now I think, we have such a strong lobbying corps made up of Native Americans that represent tribes, and not necessarily, I'm Ojibwe, but represent a number of tribes that are not Ojibwe, just, the same as Michael. And that is the same thing in the film industry, right? We have to get people in the pipeline. So it's what Sundance does with the fellowship. Illuminative has had a fellowship program with Netflix and others to help get the resources and support. We certainly have the talent, right? And we as Indian people, we are storytellers at our core. And I always say, if we weren't able to laugh, we'd be crying at our own very situation in history. But which is, I think, why we have such a well-developed sense of humor in Indian country as well. So there's no lack of talent. What we do need is provide the opportunities for people to develop that talent. And, when you're an artist, you need those sort of resources to do the work, right? And that is something that takes time.
A historical event that happened in our past, like Killers of the Flower Moon,